Welcome, listener. This is Sebastian Nothwell, here to introduce you to the 7th chapter of my gay Victorian fae romance, Oak King, Holly King, as narrated by Gary Furlong. Enjoy!
Chapter 7. Wren stared in silent horror at Butcher. The fur-lined cloak lay flung over the footboard. The highwayman boots sat on the floor amidst the snowdrift secrets, one half fallen over the other. The long-beaked Venetian leather mask and the bicocket with its feather had tumbled onto the counterpane beside Butcher. Butcher himself, by the eerie blue light of his own fey lantern, appeared deep in concentration, his handsome brow furrowed, his full lips pursed, his dark eyes intent on the page he held up before him. He sat with his knees bent, one laid out on the bed and the other upraised, the hem of his tunic far too short to disguise what lay between them despite his woolen hose. A few strands of his black hair had come loose from the leather cord at the nape of his neck, and now tumbled down over his high, sharp cheeks like ribbons of rain. All this would have formed a composition of admirable beauty, had Butcher not held Wren's doom in his calloused fingertips. Wren recovered his voice. "How long have you been waiting?" Butcher glanced up with such rapidity that it appeared as though he flickered rather than moved. His expression brightened as his eyes alighted on Wren. Then his brow contracted at Wren's evident displeasure, despite Wren's efforts to keep his tone even and his face a blank mask. Since nightfall, which had come at 6:30, meaning Butcher had hours to peruse every last piece of ill-advised literature Wren had penned throughout his career with Mr. Grigsby. How foolish of him to assume the lock on his desk would prove sufficient to keep prying eyes at bay. Wren renewed his efforts at maintaining a casual tone. "Did you enjoy your reading?" Butcher had the decency to look abashed, or so Wren thought, until he replied in a much humbled voice, "I don't have my letters." Wren felt rather abashed himself. He hadn't meant to shame the man for illiteracy. "But," Butcher added, a faint smile returning to his handsome features, "I've much enjoyed your illuminations." Wren hardly thought his doodling measured up to illuminated manuscripts, even if he did refer to his own illustrative scribbling as marginalia, and while he very much wanted to take the compliment in its intended spirit, he knew his drawings were just as incriminating as his writing. Still, Butcher appeared more intrigued than disgusted. Butcher rose from the bed with a shocking amount of grace for a man of his stature, his long limbs tangling and untangling themselves in a languid fluidity as he stretched. Wren found himself transfixed by the sight of him, likewise transfixed by the tiny blue flame which Butcher set down on the bedpost, where it neither fell nor burned through the wood, but continued to flicker and glow. A shuffling sound drew Wren's attention from it, and he belatedly saw Butcher had begun to collect the scattered papers. Wren rushed to intercept him. "That's all right. I'll handle it." Butcher paused, then handed his sheaves to Wren, who realized as he took them that Butcher had collected them in order. "Your pardon," Butcher said. Then, "I was curious." Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. The childish rhyme rose unbidden to the forefront of Wren's mind. He dropped his gaze from Butcher's face to the topmost page in the stack, whereupon a slender and beautiful knight embraced a wild, bearded lord. The marginal illustration neatly summarized the entire manuscript. If Butcher had seen this and not been put off by it, then perhaps... It seemed too much to hope for, and yet the existence of the Fey realm had seemed just as impossible before Wren had visited it himself last night. And wouldn't it be nice, for once, not to have to keep secrets? "Well," said Wren, forcing a casual tone over his thunderous pulse, "what do the Fey think of men who lie with men?" The ensuing pause drew out into a lengthy silence as the two men stared each other down. Then, in a single stride, Butcher was upon him. Even barefoot he towered over Wren, near enough to fill Wren's lungs with his wood-smoke musk, near enough for Wren to feel the heat of his body radiating through his woolen tunic, and near enough for Butcher to raise his hand to Wren's jaw and gently lift his chin. Wren's heart pounded in his ears. He gazed into those dark eyes, their depths glinting with warmth and curiosity, like the night sky shot through with stars. Then those eyes shut, and Butcher bent down, and Wren tilted his head to meet his kiss. Wren hadn't received a kiss in more years than he cared to tell, though he'd imagined many. He could never have imagined this. Butcher's lips kindled the curious spark into a bonfire, which raised through Wren's heart as he opened his mouth to taste him, devour him, consume him as he felt himself consumed by the overwhelming flame of his own desire. He burned with need above and below, and found himself clutching Butcher's arms with the grip of a drowning man. All too soon, however, his need for breath forced him to break away. He opened his eyes, gasping, and beheld Butcher gazing down on him with a fascination that matched his own passion. "I think," Butcher murmured, "a man who lies with men is the sort of man I like." No sooner had Shrike pronounced his preference than Loftus fell upon him anew. His small and slender frame seemed hardly able to contain the fury of his passion. It was all Shrike could do to keep hold of him as he took Shrike's face in both hands and all but devoured him. Shrike retaliated by seizing his neckcloth and tearing free its knot. The collar and studs went with it, leaving the slender throat exposed. Shrike broke off from the embrace, shuddered in illicit pleasure at the moan that escaped the clerk, and kissed a bruise over the pulse leaping in the stark blue vein, much to Lofthouse's evident delight. Only a moment, and then lips found lips anew, as legs tangled, and Shrike found solid proof of the clerk's enjoyment between his thighs. Very solid proof indeed. Shrike let his hand fall to trace the rising shaft in admiration. Then, after a moment's fumbling amidst the woolen layers, Shrike found the fall front of the trousers and slipped his hand inside. Lofthouse broke away from the kiss with a gasp. "Wait!" Shrike ceased. Withdrawing his hands from their work below the waist, he set them instead on the clerk's shoulders, as it seemed Lofthouse, on the brink of a swoon, lacked the strength to stand under his own power. It lasted but a moment, however, and with a firm shake of his head, which sent his feathery locks scattering across his brow in a dishevelled look that quite became him, the clerk regained his firm stance. He stepped back from Shrike, who released him entire. "Have I displeased you?" Shrike asked. "What? No. No, not at all. Quite the reverse. Only, not here," said Lofthouse, running his hand through his hair again, as if he might find his composure there. "My employer is asleep just below us, and I cannot conceive of a worse place to be caught out if—" Shrike furrowed his brow in confusion. "If what?" "English law is not so forgiving as the Fae," said Lofthouse. "At least not on the subject of sodomy." This did nothing to dispel Shrike's confusion. He tilted his head to one side. Lofthouse took this in with a glance and attempted another explanation. "Do you know what English law does to men who lie with men?" Shrike shook his head. "It hangs them," said Lofthouse. Shrike stared at him. Lofthouse averted his gaze. "The most recent execution was some 10 years back. 2 men, Pratt and Smith, caught together, tried, convicted, hanged." His jaw worked, clenching and unclenching before he continued. "The penalties for mere indecent acts are less severe, legally at least. Socially, the penalties are severe enough to drive a man to self-murder." Shrike's initial shock, a mere spark when the explanation began, flared into indignation and ended in a blaze of outrage, anger at the injustice rather than the messenger, but anger all the same, enough to inspire one to take sword in hand and exact justice of one's own. He restrained himself to smouldering, though his voice hardened as he replied, "I should like to see them try to hang us." Lofthouse glanced up in astonishment, which dissolved into a breathless huff of hollow laughter. "Well, I shouldn't like to see anything of the sort, though I appreciate the sentiment." Despite himself, a wry smile tugged at the corner of Shrike's mouth. "Still," Lofthouse continued, "you see why it would prove inconvenient for me to be caught out with another man in the garret above my place of work. Not that I expect Mr. Grigsby awake before dawn, but—" He broke off, conflicted desire twisting his porcelain features into stark shadows. He bit his lip in a manner that in a different moment might have tempted Shrike to kiss it. "You understand, don't you?" "I do," said Shrike. The relief that flickered across the clerk's handsome face proved ample balm. "That isn't to say we might not continue elsewhere. Another time, if you're willing." "Most willing," Shrike replied, and dared express some of his own relief in a smirk. The flash of a grin that answered him was worth 100 blows. "Splendid. But as for tonight, we'd best not go any further down that particular lane. And besides," Lofthouse added, "there's the matter of your predicament, which you came here to discuss." If the threat of execution had not already sobered Shrike, the reminder of his impending duel did the trick. Lofthouse gestured toward his desk. "Won't you sit down?" Shrike would have liked to sit beside him on the bed, but supposed that would prove too much temptation. He considered the desk and its chair. The desk appeared better suited to his height. He perched himself on the corner of it, with one leg drawn up beneath him. Lofthouse regarded him with a curious expression, then pulled out the chair and sat down in it, gazing up at Shrike with an intensity that made it seem as if their perspectives were reversed. "When last we spoke, you said your queen had named you king, and this meant you must duel another king to the death on the winter solstice. Do I have the right of it thus far?" "Aye," said Shrike. "Why?" asked Lofthouse. Shrike blinked at him, unable to stop himself from echoing, "Why?" "Yes," said Lofthouse, as though his question weren't unprecedented. "Why did your queen name you king? Why does this mean you must duel another king? Why the winter solstice? And for that matter, why to the death?" Shrike shrugged. "I know not." Bewilderment writ large on the clerk's handsome features. "Then why the deuce are you going along with it?" "Because I must." Lofthouse didn't appear convinced. "Tell me the whole of it, from the beginning." "I know not how it began," said Shrike, "but I can tell you it has been so since well before I ever came to the court of the Silver Wheel. Every year the Queen appoints an Oak King to rule from the winter solstice to the summer solstice, and a Holly King to reign from the summer solstice to the winter solstice. On the winter solstice the Oak King slays the Holly King, ending winter and heralding the return of spring. Then the Queen appoints a new Holly King, and on the summer solstice this Holly King slays the Oak King, ending summer and heralding the impending autumn. Then the Queen appoints a new Oak King, and so the silver wheel of the seasons continues turning." "So this ritual honours the changing seasons?" said Lofthouse. Shrike blinked at him. "It determines the changing seasons." "What?" Lofthouse scoffed. "So if the Oak King failed to kill the Holly King at the winter solstice, spring would never arrive?" "Not until the Queen appointed a new Oak King to try his luck at the winter solstice the following year, assuming that Oak King didn't fail as well." Lofthouse stared at him. "Has any Oak King ever failed to slay the Holly King before?" "Aye." "Some 28 years ago, perhaps?" Lofthouse asked more hesitantly. Shrike raised his brow, impressed at the accuracy of the clerk's estimation, particularly when one considered how little he knew of the Fey realms. "Little more than a quarter-century ago, aye." 1816, said Lofthouse. "The year without a summer. Famine, riots, and the birth of a monster. It seems," Shrike concluded, "that the consequences proved more disastrous for the mortal realm than for the court of the Silver Wheel. Indeed, and I don't think anyone should care to see their like again." Lofthouse absent-mindedly brought his hand to his mouth, still blushed pink from the frantic embrace mere moments past. Then, catching Shrike's eye, seemed to recall himself and hurriedly dropped it to fold with its fellow in his lap. Ink had spattered over the knuckles, much like the freckles on his face, Shrike noted, and the fingernails were bitten to the quick, the cuticles raw and red. Small wonder, given how he lived under the threat of execution for his very nature. It must weigh as heavily on his mind as the crown of the Oak King weighed on Shrike's brow. "So we've established the stakes, personal and universal. You wish to survive the duel, and all wish not to see an endless winter. What role do you play within this court of the Silver Wheel?" Shrike, startled out of his own musing on how he'd like to kiss the ache from those much-abused fingertips, replied, "I am a knave." "Yes," said Lofthouse, a hint of exasperation leaking into his tone. "But what does that mean?" Never before had anyone tasked Shrike to define himself beyond a single word. After some contemplation, he said, "I may do as I like, and answer to no court. and all may do as they like to me in turn without fear of reprisal from any court. Lofthouse's brow contracted beneath the careless chestnut lock that had fallen out of place when Shrike kissed him. You don't answer to the court of the Silver Wheel, then? Not until its queen named me her Oak King. Why did she? I know not, said Shrike, as I've told you. Surely you've some idea. Shrike levelled a blank look at him. Do you know the mind of you, O Queen? Fair enough, Lofthouse admitted. Let's set the why of it aside, then, and focus on the mechanics. How did you come to be crowned the Oak King? I fought in her tournament, said Shrike. Why? Shrike, whose motives no one had bothered to inquire after in centuries, required a moment of reflection before he gave his answer. Lofthouse waited with quiet patience, the keen gaze of his dark eyes fixed on Shrike. Shrike found himself in surreptitious search for hints of the clerk's thoughts in his face, even as he divulged his own. I've grown weary, Shrike said at last. Weary of surviving as a target at which any wandering knight-errant might aim their lance with impunity. Or rather, he added, with a bitter smile that did little more than bare his teeth, I tire of proving how far they've erred in assuming I would make easy prey. But more so than that, I've spent centuries perfecting my craft and seen little recognition for it. Then the court of the Silver Wheel announced a tournament on the autumnal equinox in their queen's honour. Not only jousting, but a melee. Fae of all ranks could compete for her favour, even knaves. As Lofthouse listened, a gleam of intensity came into his eyes, which Shrike thought made his features still more compelling than before. So you attempted to win her protection? I thought I could display enough martial prowess to earn a knighthood, and then perhaps my craft could be seen on a wider stage. I won the melee, for all that was worth. But instead of knighting me, Shrike's lip curled at the memory of her betrayal. She declared me the Oak King, and effectively sentenced you to death, Lofthouse concluded, either on the winter solstice or the summer. Shrike admired how succinctly he'd put it. Aye. And your soothsaying led you to believe that I have a role to play in your victory? Aye, Shrike said again. Lofthouse spent a moment in silent contemplation. He brought his fingertips to his mouth again, this time biting a cuticle before he caught himself and forced his hand back to his knee. Shrike's gaze lingered on his mouth, marking how the freckles scattered across his lips like constellations across the night sky. How dearly Shrike wished to kiss those stars. I won't deny this has been fascinating to hear, Lofthouse said, drawing Shrike's attention away from his desires. But I still have no idea what part I might possibly play in it, much less how I might render aid to your cause. Not that I don't wish to help you, he added quickly. Truly, I do. But I'm at a loss as to what's expected of me. You're a clerk, said Shrike. You have the gift of letters, and an education in the mystic arts. The former, certainly, Lofthouse admitted. The latter, however, remains to be seen. Perhaps the mere thought of you will inspire me to triumph. That earned him a sharp glance. Shrike smiled. Lofthouse mirrored it in his own bashful way. Tell me a little of the mystic arts, then. If I were some sort of warlock, how might I assist you? Shrike recalled all he knew of magic, which wasn't much. A sigil of protection, or an enchanted weapon, or a geas that compelled me to win. I don't know that I've ever compelled anyone to do anything, said Lofthouse, which Shrike thought unlikely given his unstudied natural charm. And I'm certainly no weaponsmith, but let's say I could make a sigil of protection. How would I go about it? You'd draw out the shape of it, carve it into wood or stone, engrave it on silver or gold, scribe it on parchment with ink, or spit, or blood, or seed. A steed could be branded with a sigil that allows it to gallop tirelessly for nights on end. Bird skulls, carved with runes and filled in with blood and ash, become arrowheads that always find their mark. A warrior who paints herself with woad before a fight may become ferocious and wash that ferocity away with the blood she spills and return from the battlefield serene. And what shape would a sigil of protection take? Lofthouse pressed. Whatever shape you thought best suited to the magic you wished to do. The art favours improvisation, then. It favours the intent of the practitioner. The clerk considered the matter. Again his fingertips graced his mouth. Spit, blood, and seed, you said, by which I must assume you mean. A faint blush rose beneath his freckles. A lazy smile wound its way up Shrike's cheek. Aye. Lofthouse cleared his throat. Indeed. Well, that's certainly something to consider. When is the next holy day on the Fey calendar? Samhain, Shrike replied. Halfway between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice, and a full moon. Halloween, you mean? Or Hallows' Eve, when the veil between worlds is thinnest? Shrike didn't know about any of that, and said as much, but added he thought Samhain a suitably significant date for their intended ritual. Shall I return for you then? Yes, but not here. It wouldn't do for you to be seen hanging about. Perhaps I might meet you in Hyde Park, beneath the statue of Achilles. The brawny fellow, with sword and shield? Asked Shrike. And the fig leaf. Shy amusement flickered across Lofthouse's star-speckled lips. Yes, him. Would 8 o'clock be a convenient hour? Shrike found most any hour convenient, and said so. Very well. As for getting you out of here tonight, Lofthouse continued, hauling himself out of his chair, I suppose there's nothing for it but to creep downstairs together so I may lock you out, though it may take a mad dash if Mr. Grigsby should wake. Unless... Lofthouse broke off, shooting Shrike a suspicious glance. How did you get in without our noticing? Shrike indulged in a self-satisfied smile and nodded toward the window. Lofthouse cast his astonished look first at Shrike, then at the window, then back again. And no one saw you? The fog is very thick. Lofthouse gave the window another considering look. I suppose, then, if you've no objection to going out the same way you came in? None at all. Indeed, Shrike rather looked forward to the opportunity to display his acrobatic talent. Lofthouse went to the window, unfastened the latch and swung it out wide. A chill night breeze entered alongside a few wisps of curious fog. Lofthouse stepped back and shot Shrike an expectant, almost challenging look. Shrike strode over to swing one leg out the window and balance on the ledge. He turned for one final glance back at his new comrade-in-arms. By the cold flickering light of fey flame, he beheld the dark eyes wide with wonder, the flush beneath the freckles, the chestnut locks and neckcloth both askew after their frantic embrace. Impulse struck him. Before I go, may I have something of yours? Suspicion clouded Lofthouse's brow. That would depend on what it is. A kiss, said Shrike, if you have one to spare. A wry half-smile tugged at the corner of Lofthouse's perfect mouth. Then he glanced past Shrike to the night beyond the open window, moonless and impenetrable beneath the thick fog. Not even Shrike could see more than an L-span beyond his own nose. Mortals had no hope of glimpsing what went on within an attic window. Evidently, Lofthouse drew the same conclusion, or perhaps he simply had more courage than most would credit him. Regardless, he approached the window. The second embrace proved no less passionate than the first, and far more lingering. As Lofthouse withdrew, his wistful expression showed as much reluctance as Shrike felt in breaking off the embrace. Till Samhain, then, said Shrike. Fare thee well, Lofthouse. And with a grin he shoved off from the window frame and fell backwards into the fog.
That was Gary Furlong reading the 7th chapter of the gay Victorian Fey romance Oak King, Holly King. If you liked it, you can pick up the complete story wherever fine audiobooks are found. We'll be back next week with more Right Here, Right Queer. In the meantime, thank you for listening.